For this first project, I'm going to do a series of different style earrings, but they'll all have one thing in common. They'll be made from laminated material. So to get started, I'm just picked out a lot of various material from around the shop, and I'm preparing wood for gluing. Various species, various size thicknesses, all arranged in these small laminations. Plenty of glue, lots of clamps, letting this stuff sit overnight, and then the next day I'll clean it all up. I'll clean up the edges to get an ability to inspect everything, make sure everything was glued nice and tight. Then I'll draw some circles on this material and go to the bandsaw. So without a lot of work, I've generated quite a few of these wafers. This pair here happens to have veneers in between. For this first set, I'm going to put a hollow center, so I've drilled out about a 5/16 hole. Here I'm just putting a little depression in my waste block so that the live center doesn't bottom out as I center these. I've used some double-sided tape. My waste block is a little piece of melamine. That smooth white surface really holds the double-sided tape. A little bit of turning with a variety of scraper tools just to get this nice and cleaned up and smooth. Sanded it up to 600 grit. Here I'm scoring a few little scratch marks just to give me a guide. I'm going to put some grooves using this little teeny parting tool. It's a parting tool that I've custom ground from an old tool. It's less than a 1/16 of an inch wide. I've just turned through the holly, exposing the ebony. Here I'm knocking off the corners just to kind of round it a little bit. And I'll hit this now with a sanding mop, about 320 grit. Here I'm putting a little groove to hold a piece of silver-plated wire, very flexible wire. You'll see the use of this 20 gauge wire a little bit later. Now I need to make another match or mate to this. It's just a matter of doing the same thing a second time. I'll match the diameters as close as I can. Here's the second one. So the front sides and the grooves on the edges are all done on these. Now just to mix things up, I'm going to take another pair and turn the ebony side just like I turned the holly side on the first pair. Same procedure, getting it smooth, sanding it, putting some score marks, cutting the grooves, putting the little groove on the edge, and so forth. As you go through this process, a little acetone on a paper towel keeps that waste block clean. Here's an example of why it's smart to have an extra. My center piece of ebony came loose on this one, but because I had one extra wafer to play with, I was able to just discard that one and turn another one to match with the center. Now the back sides of these, the easiest way I've found to clean them up is to use a little jam chuck. Here I've used some masking tape just because the jam was a little loose. Here's an easy wood detailer, a carbide tool with a rounded tip. That makes it really easy to put these little rounded grooves on the back side of both the ebony and the holly. These are now ready for finish. My first challenge on this next style is to create 4 wafers with identical diameters. So I've drilled a test hole there, a template if you will, 1.5 inches in diameter. I've got maple and bloodwood laminated wafers here, turning them to fit this template. I've positioned the 4 tightly packed together like this to determine the distance from center to center. Then I'm going to enlarge that distance just a smidgen, put the score line on this MDF waste block, and deepen a little groove there, and then put 4 indentations very evenly spaced around this scored line. Now I'll adjust my drill press depth stop so I can drill holes that'll put these wafers in flush on this piece of waste wood. 4 holes drilled, evenly spaced around, and then 4 more smaller holes in the center, giving me the ability to remove these later. I want really snug, tight fits, and if it's not real tight, then a little bit of masking tape to tighten it up would be in order. But they need to be tight, otherwise they're going to spin on me when I do the turning. And if one of these moves, well, you've got to start all over because you'll destroy a disc or a wafer. So here they are, back on the lathe. I'm going to true them up all smooth first, sand them up through the grits. Here I'm putting a line that'll determine where I put my first groove, and then a series of little grooves with my tiny little parting tool all the way across the face here. I'm turning just into the maple, just exposing the maple, knocking off the corners just a tiny bit on all those grooves, and then hitting it with the sanding mop. One side's done. It takes a little effort to get these out. So now I'm reversing them, but I'm turning them 90 degrees as I reinstall them. Some of these require a little tapping with a dowel, but now I've put all four back in place with the maple facing out. I'm resurfacing those sides nice and smooth. I sanded them, and the old groove marks in the MDF allow me to turn an identical set of grooves on the backside in the maple. There'll be little openings where the grooves crisscross one another. They need to be cleaned up. I'm using a little plastic toothpick there, knocking off any sharp edges with some 320 grit. And these are finished off with the sanding mop. I'd like to acknowledge Hans Weislog for the influence he's had on this particular design. This next technique, it's a bit different, but with all projects it starts with accurately milled material. These are about 3/4 of an inch thick. I've squared up the edges. Now I'm moving my blade to about a 20-degree angle. Less angle would have been fine also. I've cut a series of staves. You can see these angled pieces here. Then I've chopped those up to length and assembled them into these ready to be glued laminations. It takes a special tray to hold these pieces from just sliding apart. You've got to have a tray with good hold down to keep everything in the same plane. Lots of glue and plenty of clamping pressure is the key to this kind of a glue job. Note the little spacers on the tray. This is important. It allows the glue to escape out the bottom of the lamination as well as the top. So these have been drying overnight. You could probably get away with just a few hours, but overnight's better. A little cleanup so they'll go through the drum sander cleanly. And then circles being cut on the bandsaw. Now I've got some nice raw material to work with. So a little double-sided tape back on that little post of melamine. Turn it round, part it into 2 wafers, and then I'm just going to go at this hollowing out the center. I'm using a little scraper tool there. Just a little bit of sanding, and this side's done. This is really a quick and easy way to produce a kind of an interesting form. The other side now has been done. I can get rid of any residue there with my sanding mop, and here's a pair of earrings. Now here are the wafers that were parted off. They still have the dimple mark where the circles were drawn. The backside needed to be touched with a disc sander to make it nice and flat for mounting again with double-sided tape. The only difference on this pair is I'm putting a groove on the edge. This will allow me to wrap it with my silver wire. It'll be a different way of hanging the earring. Here's one more style. I've taken a pair of these wafers, the full thickness, over 1/2 inch thick, turning a dome, getting it nice and smooth, sanding it and so forth, getting it prepared. I'm not concerned about this little center. I'm going to cut this in half, but I am concerned about tear out. I want a nice surface. Once I've done a pair of these, then it's a matter of turning them around and hollowing them. I've got a chuck here with extended jaws, which allows me to mount that so I can have access to the wall thickness, so I can measure the wall thickness, I can observe the wall thickness. I want to get this fairly thin. By taking these calipers and measuring the total thickness, deducting say about 1/10 of an inch and using that as a depth gauge, I can get pretty close to a consistent thickness all the way around. These type of calipers also come in really handy for getting that consistent wall. A little sanding followed by the sanding mop, a little inspection, and then it's time to do another one to try to match it. A pair of these will then go to the bandsaw. I'm going to cut these into halves, just eyeballing down the center line there. I'll touch up that bandsaw cut surface on the disc sander, and then a few passes on some 320 grit here just to get a nice surface. I'm going to connect these together, but not until after I've applied finish. That comes a little later in the DVD. For this next style, I've got 6 of these wafers. This is Cocobolo and Holly. And using double-sided tape, I'm turning the Holly with a depression in the center of that disc. I'm putting a groove there, which will be used for the mounting. Now I'll take these and fit them into a little jam chuck here so I can go at the Cocobolo side. I'm going to turn right down just to meet the Holly there in the center to expose that Holly. A little sanding, and before very much work, I've got 3 pair of these to play with. I can embellish these several different ways. I'm going to show you 3 different common techniques. The first one, I'm going to take a power crafter. This is a rotary carving tool, and just pierce through the Holly just to make these random openings. The second one, I've taken 3 different drill bits and just drilled a series of holes randomly spaced and 3 different diameters. Very simple, quick, easy way to decorate those. And then the third style here, I'll use a wood burning tool and just burn the Holly with a series of randomly placed polka dots. Very quick and easy again. So there you have 3 different styles done from those same Cocobolo and Holly wafers. For finish, I'm using Death Gloss. There's lots of other clear acrylic finishes that would be a good choice as well. Multiple coats, probably at least 3, with some buffing in between. This one here, I just turned that too thin. It was too weak. I had to discard 1 pair. I was cleaning up the shop and I came upon this lamination. Something left over from a far long ago project, and I thought, well, there ought to be a pair of earrings in this. So let's make 1 more pair before we get to that final step. I decided to waste a little thickness and make 2 passes at about 15 degrees. This orients the maple at an angle through the wafer. It'll give me a different effect. Cutting my circles, and then I'm going to drill holes in the center, 2 different diameters, and do the same kind of turning on the lathe using the tailstock to center with some double-sided tape. Originally I was going to make a pair with 3 donuts all linked together, but that was too big, so now I've decided to make a pair with 2 linked and then a pair with singles. I've got 1 more chore, and that's to join these little quarter bowl sections into pairs. I'm using my power crafter to drill some tiny holes to accommodate some tiny toothpick dowels. A little bit of epoxy, and this will form a very tight bond between these little pieces. I've decided to decorate a pair of those last ones that I turned with a button of pink ivory. A little turning, fitting up the stems to fit tightly, a little epoxy, and sandwiches the donut. It adds a lot to this little pair of earrings. For hanging the earrings, I'm going to use 3 different styles. 2 of them will use this wire, the other will be just a post that's glued on. I need some little teeny screw eyes. By taking this wire and wrapping it around a nail and twisting it, I can create these little screw eyes which I can insert in the earrings. This little set of pliers I acquired from Rio Grande, the same place where I've got a lot of the jewelry components. They've come in real handy and they were a good buy. To drill the holes for the screw eyes, I'm using a little support block here. This just allows me to hold the wafer in a vertical position. The tape obviously is my depth stop. the whole diameter fits the screw eye without overstressing the wood. This is a matter of simply drilling these holes. Now some of the wafers, because of the profile that I turned, they'll need their holes drilled at a slight angle in order to avoid coming out into the void. That's where the slope side of my little support block comes in handy. I can tilt the wafer slightly and proceed to drill without daylighting the drill bit through the void. To insert the screw eyes, I'm just using a little bit of epoxy. Take a little toothpick and put some in the hole, and then use my pliers to insert the screw eyes. The only thing different with this double set of wafers is when I created the screw eyes, I put one inside the other as I twisted the wire. For the wafers with the grooved edge, it's a little trickier. I've preformed a wire after a little experimenting with the length of the wire. Those little short ends will fit in a hole that's been drilled, and then the other end will be tightened up and then twisted with a nail to form the loop there. And then a little dab of epoxy in that opening where the two ends went in. On these, instead of drilling a hole, I used what are called jump rings, just to give myself a place to put that little French hanger device. These little hangers, they open up very easily with some small needle nose pliers, and you just pinch them closed and they're good to go. Okay, we've come to the end of this session. Laminated wafers, as I'm calling them. Unlimited possibilities. I've barely scratched the surface as to what you can make in the form of an earring with just a few pieces of wood laminated together. You're welcome to copy any of these designs, but the real fun is experimenting and coming up with your own designs.